Good morning. Last night we concluded looking at the intermediate state. So we looked at various parts and in terms of how the intermediate state appears to the intermediate state being. Also, we looked at the complexion or color of the intermediate state being and their way of moving and so forth. And also, we looked at if one is to take rebirth in the desire realm as any of the 6 types of beings, such as a human or animal, or in the form realm, one does so via the intermediate state. However, if one is to be reborn in the formless realm, there one takes rebirth there immediately. There is no there is no going by means of the intermediate state. So in society, so speaking in general, from the approach of society in general, that when someone has died, there's all too often, or there's commonly the view that the consciousness is still abiding present in the corpse, and even after, say, cremation in the ashes, and then the bereaved will talk or commune with their deceased, as if with the thought that they are still present in the corpse or even in the ashes. So whilst there is this general thought, really once death has come, death has come, then the consciousness moves to the intermediate state. It doesn't abide elsewhere. And there's also the view that the deceased can be engaged with. For example, I saw my dearly beloved who died, and there are those who are, I think we say, mediums in society who say they do converse with the deceased, and the deceased will say to them, "Oh, I have these possessions," and so forth. So giving, identifying information. Whilst there are such interactions, the being that is being interacted with is not the deceased. The deceased has moved on. Rather, it is likely to be a being within the realm of spirits, because many beings within the realm, or there are beings in the realms of spirits that have, I don't know how it's translated, but something like karmic clairvoyance, or clairvoyance that's not attained by karma abiding, but through having karmic imprints for it. So such spirits then can both or have the capacity to both appear in the form of the deceased, as well as by means of their karmic clairvoyance, can reference things that only the deceased would know, and thereby would seem to be the deceased. But in actuality, it is not the deceased. So there's, I don't know if you know the word delo. So do you know this in English? So there's this role in society called delo, and so the role that they do is, so this is a commonplace in the Himalayan regions as well as in Tibet. So when this delo is this person who has this role, delo, is sleeping, then their consciousness travels to, they say their consciousness travels to other realms where they will interact with the deceased and will receive messages, guidance from the deceased to impart to the family, the grieving relatives of the deceased, such as, I'm in this realm, things aren't so good. I have these possessions, maybe make offerings with them to this delo, and through this merit, then things will go better for me. So there is this custom in our regions. So now I'm going to explain the word delo. So this de is as in it's gone beyond. So we know this from Nirvana. It's this de of gone beyond, and then the lo is to return. So the dictionary has this as a number of ways. Reappearance of a deceased person, which seems a bit different. Experiences of a return from death. Anyway, or an account of the return from death. So something like that. So I'll just stay with the Tibetan because the dictionary doesn't give a proper noun and it's being used as a proper noun. So this person who is a Delo, they go to sleep, their consciousness travels to other realms, engages with the actual deceased, and then returns to impart what was said, such as things aren't going so well where I am. I'm in the lower realms. Make offerings for me, do prayers for me, so that I can take rebirth in the God realms. And then the Delo may well having had the relatives then doing these prayers, making these offerings, then the Delo will once again in sleep. They will say they travel to these places and return. Say, yep, now much better. The deceased now is no longer in the lower realms, but in the God realms. How this often will work is that in a family where someone has recently died, they will invite a Delo to come and stay in their home. So the Delo will come. He'll say, okay, I'm going to be here for a while. Please, all of you leave. And they'll close up the home, and the Delo will be there alone, and we'll do some pujas, recite many mani mantras, and so forth. And then later, we'll call the family back and say, I've traveled to the realms of death, maybe you can say, to these other realms, and engage with your loved one. And they told me this, and I saw that this is their condition. And therefore, these are the kinds of prayers and offerings and pujas and stuff that you need to do so as to improve the situation of your deceased. So I'm recounting this to show how in the society that I'm most familiar with, there are things that are presented as fact or as belief that's about the death process and the rebirth process. And whilst these are generally accepted in society, we don't find them in the texts. So therefore, we cannot say that this is correct, because otherwise it should be presented in the text. So therefore, if we're going to speak very bluntly, then this is a means of deception, nothing more than that. So when I was younger, my family, we didn't really have any trust in any faith in these Delos. But nevertheless, I've met the one who was in our region, and there was one incident where someone had passed, so he was invited to the family's home, and he did as just described. He told the family to wait outside, closed up the house, and then he did pujas, and then he went to sleep. And the family outside were reciting many manis. Whilst the Delo was inside, suddenly an earthquake came. So an earthquake in these houses, it's pretty dangerous when you're up in the mountains. And so the Delo woke in fright and rushed out of the house. And in fact, rushed down the mountain even before the family, faster than the family who were surrounding the house. As part of the ritual, the Delo will have a plate with some Tsongkhapa. And the family's outside, he's doing his thing inside, or they're doing their thing outside, the family are outside reciting manis. Then afterwards, as evidence of having engaged with the deceased, the Delo will point to this plate of Tsongkhapa and say, look, there are footprints in there. Your deceased was here. This is proof. But in actuality, the Delo has tucked in their clothes a monkey's foot. And with that monkey's foot has just made footprints in the Tsongkhapa. And when Delo I know of, he was doing this, offering the service, this employment. And then at one point he stopped. And so he was in another region, and someone who knows him from his Delo days said, oh, I know you. You commune with the deceased. You can tell where people have been born. And this now, maybe retired Delo said, no, really, this isn't the case. I was just joking around. This really isn't the case. So such accounts of having such abilities, really, this is false, and one should not have faith in such accounts. And in modern times, these days, because the general populace's education is so much better than was largely non-existent in the past. These Delos, they're not about anymore because people do not believe such stories anymore. That being said, For an actual practitioner who has attained a path and has realizations in the continuum and has well-developed clairvoyance based in calm abiding, certainly they are able to travel to other realms and so forth. But these are for realized beings, realized practitioners, not just fellow villagers. And then a modern day story is that one of the Geshis from Serajay, in a class similar to mine, he was very learned, a full Larampa Geshe. After his graduation, he returned to Tibet to teach in Tibet, and he heard many accounts of miraculous deeds and people who could perform miraculous deeds. And he heard about, in particular, many Khandrumas. So there are many people claiming to be Khandrumas. So, being an educated monk, he made an announcement or publicized an announcement calling all the Khandrumas to him on a specific date, and announced that he would hold an examination, and they could then show before the community that they have the qualities and the signs, the characteristics that the texts say Khandrumas have. And he said, you come in this public forum, we'll have an examination, you can display your signs and qualities, and in this way we will know that you are what you claim to be. And almost no one came. So what we see here is how, with a wish to merely gain a living, people make claims about qualities that they just do not possess. So I shared these stories not just for entertainment, but to make it clear that when death comes, rebirth is immediately taken in the intermediate state. The deceased doesn't hang around somewhere, but immediately is now in the form of their new rebirth, progressing towards their actual rebirth in the desire realm or form realm. They're not hanging around conversing with others, giving advice and guidance from beyond. The only sort of exception is those who are to be reborn in the formless realm, in that they do not take rebirth in the formless realm by means of the intermediate state. When death comes, immediately they arise in the formless realm. But for all other beings who are to be born in the desire or form realm, they take rebirth by means of the intermediate state, and the intermediate state is attained immediately upon death. Last month, we looked at the process of death. Now we've looked at what follows death, that of the intermediate state. And now we look at rebirth from the intermediate state. So at the bottom of page 176, how you take rebirth in an incarnation. The many levels teaches that, and just to say, in this section, I've changed the translation a bit. In particular, the Tibetan word blood, which is what the word literally is. I've translated it to ovum. So that and a few other small changes. The many levels teaches that when you are born in a womb, an erroneous vision arises with regard to the semen and ovum of your father and mother. In that moment, like an illusion, you see your parents having intercourse, even though they are not, and you develop attachment to them. So the many levels teaches that when you're born in a womb, of course, various beings are born in a womb, but we think primarily of a human as the illustration. An erroneous vision arises with regard to the semen and ovum of your father and mother. In that moment, like an illusion, you see your parents having intercourse, though they are not, and you develop attachment to them. So the first point here is that what appears to your mind is erroneous. It's not, your parents are not having sexual intercourse, but it appears as if it were. And then relating to this erroneous vision, as if it's actually a valid or correct, attachment arises. And when attachment arises, one follows one's attachment, being drawn towards what one is attached to. So that's the function attachment plays here, that one is drawn towards what one is attached to. This text, the many levels, is it's just an abbreviated title. So I think it refers to a text called Yogic Conduct. So I think it refers to that text. And so what it is stating here is that one's attachment is drawn towards an illusion. It's not that one's parents are having sex. In fact, one's not even seeing one's parents, but rather is drawn to the semen and ovum. And it's to this illusion that one's attachment arises. Now, so that was the text, Many Levels, or the Yogic Conduct. And now from the Treasury of Abhidharma Auto Commentary, where this explains that you see your parents actually having intercourse. So we see here two different explanations. And these are describing what we saw yesterday or last night, the conditions for rebirth. The condition for rebirth here is what gives rise to the attachment for the intermediate state being, and that attachment then draws the intermediate state being towards their rebirth. So this, looking at the two different explanations, the intermediate state being may be drawn to an illusion of their parents having intercourse, or to, with the second explanation, to their actual parents actually having intercourse. But either way, it comes down to the same, that attachment arises, and that attachment leads or draws the intermediate state being to their new rebirth. So a way that we can relate to this attachment, is if one sees imagery of somewhere really beautiful, immediately an attachment arises, and from the attachment, the wish, I'd love to go there. So this is similar to what happens for the intermediate state being. And then the next point relates or explains the way of thinking of the intermediate state being at this moment, if they are to take rebirth as a male or as a female. So reading on, at the top of page 177. Furthermore, if you are to be reborn female, you want to get rid of the woman, and you become attached to the man and want to sleep with him. If you are to be born male, you want to get rid of the man, you become attached to the woman and want to sleep with her. So if one is to be reborn as a woman, one's attachment is for the male, and there's a repelling of, or a wish to separate from the woman, or a repelling towards the woman. So of the same sex that one is to be born as, there's a repelling to that towards that parent, and of the sex, and when there's an attraction to, an attachment for the parent of the opposite sex to which one is to be born as. So if we take what we looked at earlier in the paragraph, and now this, we look at it together. So the intermediate state being has an appearance that draws them to their parents. And it may be the fertilized ovum appearing as the parents having intercourse, and so as an illusion, or it may be the actual parents having intercourse. Whichever it may be, the intermediate state being is drawn towards them. And then, if the intermediate state being is to be reborn as a woman, then she'll have a rejection and aversion towards the female, the mother, and an attraction towards the male. And if the intermediate state being is to be reborn as a male, there the aversion is towards what will be the father, and a drawing towards an attachment for the female form, what will be the mother. Continue. Once this kind of desire has arisen, the closer you approach, the other limbs of that man and woman no longer appear, and you only see the male and female sexual organs. After becoming angry at that, the intermediate state being dies, transmigrates, and is reborn. So this outline we're in is how you take rebirth in incarnation, and here it is being presented. First, for the intermediate state being, attachment arises, So this is reading again. Once this kind of desire or attachment has arisen, so now the intermediate state being is drawn to their parents, and towards the one there is an aversion, and towards the other there's an attraction. The closer you approach, the other limbs of that man and woman no longer appear, and you only see the male and female sexual organs. So this is quite clear, but the key point being made is this is being driven by attachment within the intermediate state being. Then, after becoming angry at that, so now becoming angry that the parent that you are attracted to, one only sees their sexual organs and the organs of the other parent, becoming angry at that, the intermediate state being dies and transmigrates and is reborn. So here, first there's attachment. Then that attachment is transforms or develops into anger. And that then propels the rebirth, the actual rebirth into the womb. So this is the process by which the consciousness of the intermediate state being enters into the fertilized ovum. So the intermediate state being has first is drawn towards their parents, and then has attachment for the one who will be of the opposite sex to what the intermediate state being will be born as, and an aversion towards the other parent. And due to the attachment is drawn towards their parents, but really is being drawn ever closer to this semen and ovum, being drawn ever closer to that and when it is close, not perceiving the male or female, the parents at all, but only their sexual organs, then anger arises. And with anger arising, that propels the consciousness of the intermediate state being into the now fertilized ovum. And at that point, rebirth is taken in the womb. And certainly what is quite likely to happen, that it's not a single intermediate state being who is drawn to this couple having sexual intercourse, but it's likely to be a number of intermediate state beings being drawn to that same couple. But and one can imagine that there is a competition amongst the various intermediate state beings to have what they desire. In other words, because they are attached to, drawn towards their parents, in particular one of the partners, really coming down to drawn towards the semen and ovum. And there's a competition between the various intermediate state beings. You can imagine conflict between them to enter into the fertilized ovum. And sometimes, on rare occasions, perhaps more than one consciousness will enter into the fertilized ovum, and then one ends up with twins. So this is part of this process of meeting the conditions for rebirth, that the being who enters into the fertilized ovum has now met the conditions for rebirth. So this then is the process first of death, entering into the intermediate state. Once in the intermediate state, seeking out the conditions for rebirth, finding them, having the appearance of parents having intercourse, drawn towards them in the way described, and then entering into the fertilized ovum, then rebirth is taken. Now in the next paragraph, we look at what consciousness connects with. So again, in this part, just a few words changed. Furthermore, an intense period of attachment between father and mother concludes with the emission of gelatinous semen. After that, a drop of semen and an ovum invariably emerge from the two of them. Once the two substances have united in the fallopian tubes, they turn into something like, for instance, the skin on boiled milk that is cooled. So I'll read it again just because there's a bit changed. Furthermore, an intense period of attachment between father and mother concludes with an emission of gelatinous semen. After that, a drop of semen and an ovum invariably emerge from the two of them. Once the substances have united in the mother's fallopian tube, they turn into something like, for instance, the skin on boiled milk that is cool. So that's, I think, all quite clear. This is the process by which the intermediate state being dies and takes rebirth in the womb. And that concludes with the final sentence. At that point, the intermediate state existence ceases. So now the next two sentences, I'm afraid plenty of change. So I'll read it a couple of times. At that exact same time that ceases, so when death, in the exact same time that death comes in the intermediate state, through the force of the consciousness that connects with the new birth, it mixes, and now I'm sorry, this is really quite different. It mixes with the subtle great elements of the sense faculties. This is something other than the fertilized ovum. Concordant with that, the combined sperm and ovum, together with the sense faculties, arise. This is something other than the fertilized ovum and the subtle great elements. So I'll read it again. At that exact same time that ceases through the force of the consciousness that connects with the new birth, it mixes with the subtle great elements of the sense faculties. This is something other than the fertilized ovum, concordant with that. The combined sperm and ovum, together with the sense faculties, arise. This is something other than the fertilized ovum and the subtle great elements. So what these sentences are about is how the fertilized ovum develops into limbs and so forth. So looking at these two sentences, at that exact same time, so that links then to the previous sentence, at that point the intermediate existence ceases. So at this exact moment that the intermediate existence ceases, then through the force of the consciousness that connects with the new birth. So the key elements, well, maybe not, we don't say elements here, the part, or the additional, what's additional here is that now consciousness has entered the ovum and sperm. So prior to consciousness entering ovum and sperm, there was no force from consciousness. But when what marks the ceasing of the intermediate state is the consciousness, what was the intermediate state being, that consciousness departing or leaving the intermediate state and entering into the fertilized ovum. So that marks the end of the intermediate state existence. And now the consciousness is within the fertilized ovum, and through the force of that consciousness, now it continues, it mixes with the subtle great elements of the sense faculties. So the key point being made here rather, is that the consciousness has entered into the fertilized ovum. This consciousness comes together with karmic imprints. And now through the force of karmic imprints accompanying the consciousness, then the sense faculties can develop. Without consciousness entering into the sperm and ovum, there is not that force, or I think they had force or power for sense faculties to start to develop. So we continue, but through the force of the consciousness that connects with the new rebirth, the consciousness mixes with the subtle great elements of the sense faculties. This is something other than the fertilized ovum. That means, what is other than the fertilized ovum? There is now consciousness in the fertilized ovum. Concordant with that, the combined sperm and ovum, together with the sense faculties, arise. And they can arise because of the presence of consciousness and its karmic imprints. This is also something other than the fertilized ovum and subtle great elements. And the great elements then refer to the four, earth, water, heat, and energy. So these two sentences are about the development of the fertilized ovum into a physical body. It's looking at, in particular, the sense faculties. So, as we saw right at the very first sentence in this section, the many levels teaches that when you are born in a womb. So it's talking about that kind of birth, and we're thinking of a human being. So humans, we know, have sense faculties of sight and hearing and so forth. So how these are developed is a combination or a mixing together of a fertilized ovum and consciousness. A fertilized ovum on its own cannot, the sense faculties cannot develop into in a fertilized ovum without the presence of consciousness. The force of consciousness which comes together with karmic imprints, this is required for the sense faculties in the fertilized ovum to develop. So that's the meaning of at that exact same time, at that exact same time, that ceases through the force of consciousness that connects with a new rebirth. It is through the force of, it mixes with the subtle great elements of the sense faculties. So these subtle great elements of the sense faculties abide within the fertilized ovum, but they require the force of consciousness and its imprints for them to be developed. Now reading on, and other than omitting the first three words, the rest is unchanged. The consciousness that enters at that time is posited as the foundational consciousness, or the mind basis of all, by those who accept a foundational consciousness. Those who do not accept a foundational consciousness assert that it is the mental consciousness that takes rebirth. The Chittamatra philosophical tenet, for them, they will assert that this consciousness that enters at that time, so is what we've been speaking about here, with at that point the intermediate state existence ceases, and at that same time that ceases through the force of the consciousness that connects with the new rebirth. So the Chittamatrans will say that consciousness is the foundational consciousness, or most commonly translated as the mind basis of all. But that same consciousness will be referred to by the Madhyamakas, both the Svachantika and Prasangikas, not as the foundational consciousness, but as the mental consciousness. Now, moving to the next paragraph, which presents that one is to be born in the lower realms, one needs to have the wish to be born there. Wish is not the great word, but needs to be drawn there, which will lead to one wanting to be reborn there. So, reading from the next paragraph. If the intermediate state being, has no desire to go to a birthplace, the intermediate state being will not go there. And if it does not go there, it will not be born there. Therefore, the intermediate state being of someone devoted to wrongdoing, who has committed and accumulated an action for rebirth in hell, such as killing sheep or trading in poultry or pigs and the like, will see as if in a dream sheep and so forth at their birthplace, and will rush there with the delight of previous familiarity. So looking at the first sentence, in the context of what we've looked at above, which is that of the process of a being who's died and gone into the intermediate state and will be reborn as a human. So as we've just seen above, such an intermediate state being will see their human parents and be drawn to them, have an attachment, drawing them towards initially their parents and thereafter to one in particular. If that drawing or attachment is absent, then the intermediate state being will just not go there. And if not in a particular realm or in particular couple of parents, the intermediate state being cannot be born there because they haven't been drawn to it. So this is that meaning of the sentence. If it has no desire to go to a birthplace, the intermediate state being will not go there. And if it does not go there, it will not be born there. Staying with this first sentence, in the context of a human, we should recognize the role that karma plays here and how many conditions are required for this process to unfold. So the intermediate state being, or when a being dies, and the propelling karma propels them for rebirth, say as a human, they are in the intermediate state as in the form of a human, and will be drawn to rebirth as a human. And other similar state beings will appear to them, and such a human place of birth will also appear to them. Within the intermediate state, this being will have a number of appearances that are arising for them, as well as there'll be many things around them that just do not appear to them. Because as we saw before, only appearances that they are of the same realm can appear to them. So this now intermediate state being that is to be born as a human will perceive humans and the human world, and they will be drawn to some parents, but not others. So there'll be couples having intercourse. Some will appear to the intermediate state being, some will not. Some that appear to the intermediate state being will have no impact on the intermediate state being. There'll be no attraction from the side of the intermediate state being. It'll be as if they're seeing something, but are not drawn towards it. Others, though, they will be drawn towards it. Other parents having sexual intercourse, the intermediate state being will be drawn, will be attracted to that. So what we see here is the role of the karmic connection between the intermediate state being and their potential parents. Without such a karmic connection, then perhaps the parents having intercourse will not even appear to the intermediate state being, or may well appear, but have no impact on the intermediate state being. In other words, they're not drawn, attracted to it. So that's one point to make. Furthermore, when, as mentioned earlier, they are drawn towards a fertilized ovum, they're seeing the parents having intercourse and they're drawn towards this, they may well not be the only intermediate state being who has a karmic connection with those parents and therefore is drawn towards them, and they may well miss out. And there may be another intermediate state being may beat them to it and enter into the fertilized ovum. So there, not only is the karmic connection with the parents required, but it's also, even with the karmic connection, it's not certain that the being will take rebirth with those parents. Moreover, depending on the karma of all the beings involved, particularly that of the intermediate state being, their karma may not be sufficient that even once they take rebirth, in other words, they've entered into the fertilized ovum, they've left behind the intermediate state, they may well not live very long. So we normally call this a miscarriage. So this may happen very quickly before pregnancy is even recognized, or sometime after. So rebirth from the womb may well not come about. So all of this I mention just to make it clear that there are many factors involved here to illustrate the subtleties of karma and the various components in a karmic process that have impact. Continuing in the text. So that we've looked at that first sentence then in relation to human beings taking rebirth. Now beings taking rebirth in the lower realms such as hell. So therefore, the intermediate state being of someone devoted to wrongdoing, who has committed and accumulated an action for rebirth in hell, such as killing sheep or trading in poultry or pigs and the like. So, read the whole thing. Will see as if in a dream, sheep and so forth at their birthplace, and will rush there with the delight of previous familiarity. So this then explains the process by which beings take rebirth in the lower realms, for example, in hell. Because what we've seen already is to take rebirth in a realm, one needs to have desire, the first sentence, have desire to go to that birthplace. If one doesn't have desire to go there, one cannot take rebirth there. So how then does one end up in hell? Why would one have desire to go to rebirth in hell? That is what is explained here. So therefore, the intermediate state being, or someone devoted to wrongdoing. The devoted to wrongdoing, it literally means has no vows. So we could take this as someone who's not living an ethical life of someone who's living within the confines of ethical virtue, the confines of vows. So that's the meaning of this term, devoted to wrongdoing, someone who does not have vows, who has committed and accumulated. So it's maybe not so clear. This means who's done a complete karmic action. So I think it's normally translated as done and accumulated. So it's a complete karmic action, committed and accumulated an action for rebirth in hell, such as killing sheep or trading in poultry or pigs and the like. So this is just an illustration of complete non-virtuous karmic actions that have the potential or the strength to lead to rebirth in the hells. So a being who has been propelled by such a karmic imprint, that karmic imprint will lead to particular appearances for them, which they find attractive, and therefore attachment arises. So the sentence continues, will see as if in a dream sheep and so forth at their birthplace, and will rush there with the delight of previous familiarity. So someone who's killed a lot of sheep, for them, seeing sheep, engaging with sheep is something that is very familiar to them, and they have taken delight in this. So now this is this vision that they are seeing is something attractive because it's familiar to them and familiar in a pleasing way, something they see as delightful. Therefore, they are drawn to this particular rebirth, despite it being in the hells. They're drawn there, they're attached to it, despite it being in the hells. Then the very next sentence, they will then become angry at the sight of their birthplace. The intermediate state existence will end, and they will be born there. Final sentence, similar to this are rebirths as hell beings, hungry ghosts with goiters, and so forth. You'll notice here there's no reference to being born in a womb, because this is describing hell, where rebirth is spontaneous, not from a womb. If you have questions then on this, then let's take some questions now. If you don't have questions, then we can continue.
I'm just wondering what the lifespan of a hungry ghost is.
Being as a hungry ghost. What is the lifespan of a hungry ghost? So I don't remember precisely. I don't remember, but it is a variable lifespan. It can be a very long lifespan.
And the year lengths are the same as humans, or are they? What's the time span in relation to humans?
Way it would be described in the text is in a way that the intended audience can understand. So therefore, the presentation will be in human years, because this is something that the human audience could understand. So for gods, especially the long life gods, with all gods, the lifespan compared to humans is exceptionally long. And it's said that a mere moment of a god existence is like 500 human years. And so therefore the lifespan of gods, in particular those long life gods, is exceptionally long. And again, the way the lifespan is presented is in a way the audience, the humans, can understand. For animals, this is quite easy because we have lots of knowledge here. We know there's great variety in the lifespan of animals. And in a similar way, there is variety in terms of the length of the lifespan amongst spirits or amongst pretas. So with pretas, there are some who they have the potential for long lifespans, although I don't remember what the texts present. But it's not definite that a long lifespan will necessarily be achieved.
I just have a question about Shravaka arhats and solitary realized arhats. So in the schools that do accept that they continue to be born, and also like 8 rounds with Bodhisattvas that are Hindu like mental body, do they also go through the Bardo process? Those who have the mental body, and is a Bardo being considered to be one of the 6 realms of existence? Like if it's a samsaric being, does it have to be one of the 6 in one of the 6 realms? And if so, which one?
Sure. So for either 8 round bodhisattvas or the equivalents, the Shravaka and Pratyeka arhats, do they, when they die, do they go through a bardo or not? And then the bardo is considered one of the 6 realms, the bardo existence, one of the 6 realms, and if so, which?
And if it's a samsaric being, does it have to be one of the 6 realms? And if so, we have to point it to one of the 6.
Okay. So to answer just the first question, then come back for the second. So for both the arhats, the Theravada arhats, as well as an 8th ground bodhisattva, whether they take rebirth by means of the bardo or not depends on the realm in which they will be reborn. So a bodhisattva is not going to be reborn in the formless realm, but will be reborn elsewhere, probably as a human, and therefore will take rebirth by means of the bardo. And so too with the hero and solitary realizer arhats. If they go off to the formless realm to abide, then as we saw previously, rebirth is taken immediately, not with no need for not by means of the intermediate state. But when a hero solitary realizer arhat is going to take rebirth as, for example, as a human being, then they will take rebirth by means of the bardo. If this again with the arhats, if they are going to take rebirth in Tsongkhapa, in Dewachen, then their rebirth there is spontaneous. So they won't take rebirth by means of the bardo. So in brief, for all 3 classes of these highly realized beings, they take rebirth by means of the bardo if it's required for the realm and the birthplace in which they will be reborn.
For an arhat, if they don't have attachment, right, aversion, attachment, ignorance, they can still get attached to like the other gender that they would be in their place.
So these are beings who have abandoned attachment together with their seeds. So will they then still take rebirth in the way presented here, which is clearly with attachment and anger?
With attachment to the other gender and then the place.
So this description is for beings beneath that, ordinary beings and also extraordinary beings, but not at that level. So for arhats, when in the life they attain arhatship, become a foe destroyer, they will be born spontaneously in Tsongkhapa, and so not by means of the bardo. For 8th ground bodhisattvas, they will take rebirth, for example, amongst humans, but they won't do so under with attachment and anger playing any role because they have abandoned the afflictions together with the seeds. But they will take rebirth due to their power, their aspiration, or the prayers that they have made. So for them, the process is a little different. But they will, in terms of being reborn as a human, still do that by means of the intermediate state, but not with attachment or aversion attachment or anger playing any role. So this presentation, which is at the conclusion of looking at true sufferings and true origins, we're talking about contaminated karma. So this presentation here is for those beings who take rebirth under the control of the contaminated karma and afflictions. Arya Bodhisattvas are on the first ground. They are accumulating uncontaminated karma, and therefore their mental body, and their rebirth will be taken by means of uncontaminated karma. So for Arya Bodhisattvas, the experience, the process is quite different. But this presentation is one in concordance with those beings under the power of contaminated karma and the afflictions. So the intermediate state isn't listed as a separate realm, rather the 6 realms of the desire realm. These are the places of, maybe you could say, physical rebirth. So where one is born from the intermediate state. Within the sixfold division or presentation, there isn't something separated out for the intermediate state. So within the 6 realms of migrators, then the intermediate state beings are not counted separately. Rather, one looks at where the beings are abiding, where they're living. If one talks of 3 existences, then one will talk about the existence of birth, existence of the intermediate state, and existence of death. So there is one specifically for the intermediate state. So there's the existence of birth, then there's followed by the existence of death, followed by the existence of intermediate state, followed again by the existence of birth. So there it would be separated if one was talking about the 3 existences.
Yes.
Gela's pointing this way.
I'm going to ask, what's the reason that the anger arises? Is it because of the competition that is it at that time?
Sure. Yeah, so what leads to the rise of anger is possibly the competition between the intermediate state. What I imagine it is, because again that isn't stated more clearly than it is here, is that in the same way in our own life, when we are drawn towards something, but then something obstructs our attaining what we are drawn to, we have a negative reaction to that. So it may be anger, it may be something like frustration or annoyance, but that's something we experience in our normal life. We're drawn towards something, but if we cannot have it, then we get frustrated, annoyed, angry. And I think it will be like that the intermediate state being first is drawn to their parents and then drawn to a particular parent. And being drawn towards that parent, or attached to that particular parent, as they gain closer to the object of their attraction, they now no longer see their desirable parent, but the genitals of their parents. And that then leads to them getting angry, because what they were attracted to, they can't have. Suddenly they're seeing something very different. So I think it's that. I want to be clear. This is my opinion. I'm saying this based on my own reasoning. It's not something I can say with valid cognition, in that I haven't observed it or I haven't read it. So this is my opinion.
Yeah, that can be just.
Is there any way of changing the direction of the outcome when in the bardo through training the mind now? Or is it just something that is inevitable? Anything be done once you're in the bardo?
So can anything be done to aid the direction of rebirth? Once one is in the bardo, for example, to training prior to entry into the bardo, and then utilizing that training in the bardo. Yeah.
Or is it simply a result of what the other factors that occur?
And by changing the direction, do you mean changing the realm, or how big a change? Okay.
Any change.
Yeah. So because as in relation to the earlier question, the beings in the bardo will be of varying capacity. But so we mentioned before that Arya Bodhisattvas, to be born as a human, will also take rebirth by means of the bardo. But let's just stay with common folk. So for ourselves, once one is in the bardo, one really doesn't have much control over one's thought process. Really, one is dependent or reliant under the complete control of the karma that was accumulated previously. So when one's propelling karmic imprint ripens at the time of death and one's propelled to one's next rebirth by means of the intermediate state, that karmic imprint is what will control one there. There isn't really the capacity for ordinary people to be able, certainly not to change realm, but not even within the realm to say, maybe not this set of parents, but those set of parents, kind of thing, under the control of their karma entirely. That being said, as we saw in the text last night, that if the conditions for rebirth are not met after a week, then death comes and then change can come about there. But that too is not something that the intermediate state being has control over. The intermediate state being cannot say, well, time is up. I want a better imprint ripening for my next time. They are under the control of their karma. Therefore, the period before one reaches the end of life, this is the time where one, through what one accumulates, can have influence, but not then. So your question really points to the very purpose of this presentation, in that this presentation isn't intended to merely explain the process of moving from this life, or this life ending by means of death, moving by means of the intermediate state into a new rebirth. The purpose of this presentation is far beyond that, in that through recognizing that once one is in the bardo, things will appear, and one will be drawn, just like one is now, to what appears to one, or repelled by what appears to one. Recognizing that, and recognizing that to have an impact on where one will be at that time, so in the intermediate state, now is the time. Because that, the intermediate state is a dependence arising, and that is dependence on the karmic causes created now. So bearing in mind all that has been looked at thus far, one has heard about the low realms, heard about the high realms, and immediately it's clear to one of those two where one would be born. Thereafter, we learnt about the causes required to attain rebirth there. So, having given rise to a wish to be reborn again in the higher realms, and heard that the causes are those of ethics, generosity, patience, enthusiastic perseverance, and prayer, this is now the time to accumulate those prayers. If those prayers are accumulated well, one can have confidence that when this life is ending, having confidence that this life has been spent well, I don't need to worry. I will progress through the bardo. My karma will propel me towards a good rebirth. I don't need to be concerned. So therefore, based on what we've heard, now is the time to cultivate the required causes, because it is these causes that will lead to the result. We cannot wish a better result once those causes have been activated. Then it is too late. Now is the time. And what we also saw last night is that there is some difference in presentation. So in Vasubandhu's text, so this was the very bottom of page 175, he states in his Abhidhamma that once in the bardo, one's destination cannot be changed. The realm cannot be changed. Whereas in Asangha's Abhidhamma, he says when death comes for the intermediate state being, if for rebirth again in the intermediate state, then the realm can change. A new propelling karmic imprint can lead to the attainment of a new realm. So we see there is some difference in view, but nowhere is it said that one can choose like if in your shop, I want this and not that. Rather, it's like if you want to travel somewhere and you get the visa for that destination, You can only go to that destination. You cannot now choose another country because things are better. So now is the time. Now is the time to cultivate these causes and to dedicate, so this is the prayer, to attain excellent rebirths.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you. And then we can stop there now for lunch. Thank you.